The shatter of ceramic against drywall pierced the morning silence of the Reeves household. James Reeves stood in his kitchen, chest heaving, staring at the dark coffee staining the wall like a Rorschach test of his rage. His teenage daughter Emma's spoon clattered against her cereal bowl as she flinched, milk sloshing over the rim. "Dad," her voice trembled, but he couldn't look at her, wouldn't look at the fear in her eyes that mirrored her mother's. Sarah Reeves gripped the kitchen counter, knuckles white. "Emma, go wait in the car." Their daughter fled, leaving her breakfast half-eaten. The front door clicked shut with deliberate softness, as if even the house feared triggering another explosion. "You're becoming just like your father," Sarah whispered, each word a precise incision. "The way Emma looked at you just now. It's the same way you used to look at him." James's hand instinctively went to his pocket, feeling the cold ridge of steeled knuckles through the fabric. His father's last gift before drinking himself to death in a downtown gutter. He'd sworn he'd never used them, but lately they'd become a comfort, a constant weight reminding him he had power when everything else felt out of control. "I'm nothing like him," James spat, but his reflection in the coffee-stained window told a different story. At 42, he had his father's heavy brow, the same deep-set eyes that could turn from warm to ice in a heartbeat. Last week's rejection letter for the detective position lay crumpled in the trash, his third failed attempt at promotion. "Then prove it," Sarah challenged, finally turning to face him. "Talk to someone. The department has counselors, and let them mark my file. Give them another reason to pass me over." He yanked his badge from the counter, the metal catching morning light like a warning. "I'm handling it. Like you handled Marcus Thompson's arrest last month." Sarah's words stopped him at the doorway. Marcus, the college kid who'd resisted arrest, and somehow ended up with 3 broken ribs. The investigation had been quietly closed, another file buried in the system. James's jaw clenched. "You don't know what it's like out there. The streets aren't getting any safer. Sometimes force is the only language they understand." "They?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Listen to yourself, James. You used to talk about protecting people, serving the community. Now all you talk about is force and control." He slammed his locker at the precinct 20 minutes later, the metal clang echoing through the empty row. Early shift had its advantages. No one to witness his trembling hands as he checked his weapon, adjusted his vest, touched the steel knuckles one last time before transferring them to his uniform pocket. Officer Chen passed by, offering a coffee and a careful smile. "Rough morning." "Nothing I can't handle," James replied automatically, the lies coming easier these days. He checked his body camera, noting the low battery light blinking. He should replace it, but something made him hesitate. Sometimes evidence was better left uncollected. The morning sun hit him as he stepped out to his patrol car, the weight of the steeled knuckles a constant reminder against his thigh. Today would be different. Today he'd prove them all wrong about him. Today he'd show them what real control looked like. He couldn't know that in less than 4 hours, his entire world would shatter faster than that coffee mug against his kitchen wall. Bernard Mitchell stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting his bow tie with trembling fingers. The gesture, once automatic after decades in academia, now required his full concentration. The post-it notes plastered around his luxury condo, yellow paper butterflies bearing his son's concerned handwriting, reminded him, "Take pills with breakfast, wallet and phone check, call Secret Service before leaving." He peeled the last note off with deliberate defiance. At 78, he'd walked these D.C. streets since before his son could spell presidential campaign. The dementia diagnosis 3 weeks ago hadn't changed that. At least, that's what he told himself. "Professor Mitchell," his private nurse, Carmen, called from the kitchen. "Your medication schedule has changed, remember? The new dosage needs to be taken with food." Bernard grimaced at his reflection. "I've been feeding myself since before you were born, young lady." The words came out sharper than intended, professorial authority masking his fear. The new pills made him fuzzy, and fuzzy wasn't acceptable for a man who'd spent 40 years teaching constitutional law at Georgetown. He pocketed the pills instead of taking them, ignoring Carmen's concerned gaze as he headed for the door. "I'm getting breakfast at Morrison's Diner. Been going there every Tuesday for 20 years. Sir, the Secret Service detail. Will be informed when I'm already halfway there." He managed a warm smile. "Some independence must be preserved, my dear. Dignity before security." The spring morning embraced him as he stepped outside, cherry blossoms painting the sidewalks pink. Bernard inhaled deeply, pretending not to notice the discreet black SUV that pulled out 2 blocks behind him. His son's protective detail had learned to keep their distance, at least. The first wave of dizziness hit him near DuPont Circle. Bernard steadied himself against a lamppost, suddenly aware he couldn't remember if he turned left or right at the last intersection. The street signs blurred, familiar landmarks shifting like desert mirages. He fumbled for the pills in his pocket, hands shaking. A young woman's voice cut through his confusion. "Are you all right, sir?" Bernard turned too quickly. The world tilted sharply, and he stumbled forward. His shoulder connected with something solid. The woman, he realized with horror. She had been pushing a stroller. Coffee splashed, and a baby's wail pierced the morning air. "Oh my God, my baby." The woman's cry drew immediate attention. Bernard tried to apologize, to explain, but the words tangled in his throat. Years of eloquent lectures before Supreme Court justices, and now he couldn't form a simple sentence. "I'm so sorry. The medication." He reached for his wallet, wanting to offer compensation for the spilled coffee, but his hands wouldn't cooperate. The crowd growing around them only increased his disorientation. The baby's cries grew louder. Someone in the crowd started filming. Bernard felt sweat beading on his forehead as he tried again to speak, to explain himself. He was a professor, a father, the president's father, but the words wouldn't come. Through the gathering crowd, he vaguely registered a police officer approaching, face set in hard lines. Bernard raised his hands, a gesture of peace, of explanation. But as he opened his mouth to identify himself, the world spun violently again. His prestigious vocabulary dissolved into confused stammering. The last clear thought he had, before everything went terribly wrong, was that he should have listened to Carmen about those pills. Officer James Reeves watched the scene unfold from across the street, his fingers absently tracing the steel knuckles in his pocket. The crying baby's wail set his teeth on edge, reminding him of Emma's tears that morning. Through the red haze of his mounting anger, he focused on the elderly man's expensive watch, the tailored suit that probably cost more than his monthly salary. "Dispatch, we've got a 10 to 50 at DuPont Circle," he reported, already moving. His body camera's red light blinked weakly. Low battery. He should call it in, but something darker whispered, "Not today." Among the gathering crowd, 16-year-old Maya Chen, Officer Chen's daughter, raised her phone, lead streaming to her thousands of TikTok followers. "You guys, something's going down," she whispered to her audience. "This cop looks like he's about to. Kid, you might want to keep recording." The gravelly voice belonged to retired Sergeant Mike Donovan, who recognized the dangerous glint in Reeves' eyes. He'd seen that look too many times during his 30 years on the force. But step back, way back. Reeves shouldered through the crowd, each step heightening his irritation. The mother was still fussing over her baby, tears streaming down her face. The elderly man swayed slightly, trying to form words that came out garbled and confused. "Sir, put your hands where I can see them," Reeves barked, his voice carrying the edge that had become all too familiar lately. His right hand stayed in his pocket, fingers curled around cold steel. Bernard Mitchell blinked rapidly, trying to focus. "Officer, I'm trying to. The medication. If you just..." The words refused to align properly in his mind, emerging as fragmented phrases that only served to deepen Reeves' suspicion. Maya's livestream counter ticked up. 500 viewers, 1,000, 2,000. Her hands trembled as she narrated quietly. The old man seems sick or something. He's not threatening anyone. But this officer. Show me some ID, now. Reeves demanded, deliberately mishearing Bernard's confused attempts at explanation. The steel knuckles seemed to pulse against his palm, his father's whispered lessons echoing. Sometimes you gotta teach respect the hard way, boy. Sergeant Donovan pushed forward. Officer, hold up. Something's not right here. Let's take a breath. But Reeves was beyond hearing. The morning's humiliation, years of passed-over promotions, his daughter's fearful eyes. It all crystallized into this moment. The elderly man's apparent affluence, his seeming defiance, the crowd's judging eyes. Bernard finally managed to reach for his wallet, the movement unsteady. My ID. I'm Professor. He's reaching. Someone shouted, and that was all Reeves needed. The steel knuckles slipped on with practiced ease, muscle memory from late nights spent punching bags in his garage. Time seemed to slow as he stepped forward, his body camera's light giving one final blink before going dark. Maya's phone captured it all in 4K. The flash of metal, Bernard's confused expression, Donovan's aborted warning shout. Her livestream counter hit 10,000 just as Reeves drew back his fist. In the crowd, a Secret Service agent named Thompson was just raising his coffee cup to his lips. He recognized Bernard Mitchell, a fraction of a second too late, his shout lost in the collective gasp of the crowd. The next sound would change everything. The sound of steel meeting flesh and bone echoed across DuPont's circle like a gunshot. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The baby's cries silenced, the crowd's breath held, even the spring breeze stilled. Bernard Mitchell's body moved through space with terrible grace, his bow tie coming undone as he fell. Maya's phone captured it in terrible clarity. The arc of blood from Bernard's split lip, the way his glasses flew off and skittered across the pavement, the dull thud as his head met concrete. Her livestream counter exploded. 25,000, 50,000, 100,000 viewers watching in horrified real time. Jesus Christ, Sergeant Donovan breathed, already running forward. Someone call a bus. Now. Reeves stood over Bernard's crumpled form, chest heaving, the steel knuckles gleaming red. The familiar surge of power coursed through him, until he saw Bernard's wallet, thrown open on impact. A photo spilled out, Bernard Mitchell in a sharp tuxedo, arm around a much younger man in front of the White House. The inscription read, "To Dad, on my inauguration day." Secret Service agent Thompson dropped his coffee cup, coffee splashing across his polished shoes. His earpiece crackled to life as he barked, "Eagle's father down." I repeat, Eagle's father is down at DuPont Circle. Medical emergency, officer involved. The color drained from Reeves' face as realization dawned. His hand, still wearing the steel knuckles, began to shake. Around him, the crowd's phones rose like a forest of accusing eyes, recording his moment of recognition. Bernard lay still, blood pooling beneath his silver hair. His bow tie, now completely undone, fluttered in the returning breeze like a broken wing. His lips moved slightly, forming words that emerged as a wet whisper. "I was trying to tell you." Maya's voice shook as she narrated for her now millions of viewers. "Oh my God, you guys. That's the president's father. The cop just attacked the president's father." Sirens wailed in the distance as Secret Service vehicles screeched to a halt around the circle. Agent Thompson was already performing first aid, his training kicking in despite his shock. "Stay with us, Professor Mitchell. Keep those eyes open." Reeves stumbled backward, the steel knuckles suddenly burning against his skin. He tried to pull them off, but his hands were shaking too badly. A dark stain spread across his uniform shirt, whether sweat or coffee from his morning's rage. He couldn't tell. The young mother with the baby had pressed herself against a storefront, crying silently. Her baby, sensing the shift in atmosphere, had gone eerily quiet. Sergeant Donovan moved between her and the scene, his retired status forgotten as he took command. Everyone back. Give them space. Through the gathering chaos, Maya's phone caught one final, crucial detail: Bernard's hand weakly grasping at something in his pocket. As paramedics swarmed around him, a small orange bottle rolled across the sidewalk, his new medication, never taken. Reeves watched the bottle roll to a stop at his feet, the prescription label clearly visible. Mitchell, Bernard, take with food. May cause confusion and dizziness. His legs gave out, and he sank to his knees just as the first news vans began arriving. In the White House Situation Room, an aide burst through the door. "Mr. President, sir, it's about your father." The videos were already going viral. The White House press room erupted into pandemonium as Press Secretary Diana Chen's phone buzzed for the 18th time in 3 minutes. She glanced at the screen. Another text from her daughter Maya. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know it would go viral like this. Ladies and gentlemen, please." Diana's voice was drowned out by the cacophony of shouting journalists. Maya's livestream had just hit 5 million views. On the monitors behind her, every major network was running the footage in a continuous loop. The punch, the fall, the terrible moment of recognition. 3 blocks away, Bernard Mitchell was being loaded into an ambulance, a swarm of Secret Service agents creating a protective corridor. Agent Thompson rode with him, gripping the professor's hand while rattling off vital signs. BP dropping, possible concussion, facial fracture. His other hand pressed against his earpiece, relaying every detail directly to the White House medical unit. At NATO headquarters in Brussels, President Mitchell stood at the podium, his teleprompter scrolling steadily through a speech about international cooperation. The chamber was packed with world leaders and diplomats, all unaware of the drama unfolding across the ocean. The bonds between nations, like the bonds between people. He stopped mid-sentence as his earpiece crackled. His chief of staff's voice, usually steady as a surgeon, trembled. "Sir, it's about your father. There's been an incident." The president's hands gripped the podium, knuckles white. The assembled diplomats watched in confusion as the color drained from his face. A murmur rippled through the chamber as phones began buzzing with news alerts. Back in D.C., Officer James Reeves sat in the back of a police cruiser, not under arrest, not yet, but for his own protection. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Internal affairs, the police union rep, and increasingly desperate calls from Sarah. He stared at his hands, still seeing Bernard's blood on them, though he'd wiped them clean. The steel knuckles lay in an evidence bag now, photographed by CSI techs, who kept shooting him sidelong glances. His body camera's dead battery light seemed to mock him. In a high school classroom across town, Emma Reeves watched her father's actions play out on infinite repeat as her classmates whispered and stared. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Come home now. Don't talk to anyone." The hashtag President's Father rocketed to #1 worldwide. Maya Chen's original livestream spawned thousands of reaction videos, frame-by-frame analyses, and conspiracy theories. Clips of Bernard's previous public appearances surfaced, giving guest lectures at Georgetown, attending state dinners, always the proud father beaming at his son's accomplishments. At George Washington University Hospital, teams of specialists rushed to the emergency room. Bernard had regained consciousness in the ambulance, asking not about himself, but whether the young mother's baby was all right. The hospital's head of neurology personally examined the CT scans while the White House physician hovered nearby. In the NATO chamber, President Mitchell stood rigid as his security detail quickly escorted him off stage. In his earpiece, updates flowed continuously. His father's vital signs, the officer's identity, the explosion of public outrage. As he was rushed to Air Force One, his Secret Service codename Eagle echoing through radio channels, a text message lit up his phone. It was from Bernard, typed by Agent Thompson. "Son, don't worry. I shouldn't have been so stubborn about the medication. Stay and finish your speech." The president's reply was instant. "I'm coming home, Dad. The world can wait." The Attorney General's office hummed with controlled chaos as surveillance footage from every angle of DuPont Circle played across multiple screens. "Get me everything on James Reeves." Janet Martinez barked, her reading glasses perched precariously on her nose. Every complaint, every commendation, every parking ticket since kindergarten. A junior attorney slapped a file on her desk. "Ma'am, you need to see this. 7 excessive force complaints in the last 3 years, all buried." Buried by whom? Martinez's eyes narrowed as she scanned the documents. Each complaint had been marked unfounded by the same supervising lieutenant. Each victim shared a similar profile: educated, affluent, caught in moments of confusion or distress. Across town, Sarah Reeves stood in her kitchen, staring at the wall where coffee stains still marked her husband's morning rage. Emma sat at the table, her phone open to her father's booking photo. The steel knuckles had earned him federal weapons charges on top of everything else. "Mom," Emma's voice cracked, "there's something I never told you. Last month, when Dad came to pick me up from soccer practice, he had those brass knuckles then too. He said they were for protection, but the way he held them." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth as pieces of a puzzle she'd long ignored clicked into place. At George Washington University Hospital, the president paced outside his father's room while doctors delivered their assessment. "The orbital bone is fractured, Mr. President. There's minor brain swelling, but our primary concern is how this trauma might accelerate his cognitive decline." Bernard's voice carried weakly from inside. "Son, stop wearing a hole in their floor and come in here." In the hospital's security wing, James Reeves sat handcuffed to a chair, waiting for his lawyer. Internal affairs investigators had been grilling him for hours. His lieutenant had already thrown him under the bus, denying any knowledge of the steel knuckles or previous complaints. "Your body camera," the IA investigator said. "Was it really a battery issue? Or did you disable it deliberately, like you did on the Thompson case last month?" Reeves stared at his reflection in the one-way glass. For a moment, he saw his father's face staring back. At the White House, Press Secretary Diana Chen faced a room of reporters hungry for blood. Her daughter's live stream had become a national Rorschach test. Some saw police brutality. Others claimed Bernard should have complied, while conspiracy theorists spun wild tales about staged incidents and political theater. "The president," Diana announced, her voice steady, "will be addressing the nation at 9 p.m. Eastern. Yes, he has spoken with his father. No, he will not be recusing himself from any investigations. This is not merely a presidential matter. This is a son watching footage of his father being assaulted. We ask for basic human decency in your coverage." In the hospital's chapel, Agent Thompson lit a candle. He'd been Bernard's primary Secret Service detail for 3 years, had begged him to accept closer protection. "I should have been closer," he whispered. "You were exactly where I demanded you be." Bernard's voice surprised him. He stood in the chapel doorway in a wheelchair, against medical advice, a nurse hovering anxiously behind him. His face was a map of purple bruises, but his eyes were clear. "Nobody is responsible for this except the man who chose violence, and those who saw his violence coming but did nothing." As night fell over D.C., protesters gathered outside the police department, their candles flickering like fireflies. Among them stood Maya Chen, no longer live streaming but holding a sign that read, "Who do you serve? Who do you protect?" The president's address was 1 hour away. Emma Reeves sat in her bedroom, finger hovering over the post button on TikTok. Her hands trembled as she watched her own face in the preview. "My name is Emma Reeves, the officer who attacked the president's father. He's my dad, and there's something you all need to know." Downstairs, Sarah watched her daughter's first video go viral. The raw honesty in Emma's voice as she described growing up with her father's rage struck a chord that transcended political divisions. "The steel knuckles weren't new," Emma revealed. "They were always there, like a monster living in our house. In the hospital's private wing, Bernard Mitchell watched the video on his tablet, his bruised face reflected in the screen. The president sat beside him, tie loosened, looking more like a worried son than the leader of the free world. "I won't press charges," Bernard said quietly. "Dad, you can't be serious. I'm not finished." Bernard's professor voice emerged, despite his injuries. "I won't press charges because this is bigger than one assault. That man's daughter just exposed a system that saw the warning signs and did nothing. This isn't about forgiveness. It's about accountability." Across the city, in a holding cell, James Reeves watched his daughter's video on a guard's phone. Each word hit harder than any punch he'd ever thrown. Tears rolled down his face as Emma described the day he nearly hit her but punched the wall instead. The steel knuckles, still in evidence, had left distinctive marks that now linked him to 3 unsolved assaults from his rookie years. "Your father's knuckles," his lawyer said, reviewing the evidence. "Did he use them on you?" Reeves touched his chest, feeling phantom bruises from 20 years ago. "I promised I'd never be like him," he whispered. At the Justice Department, Attorney General Martinez laid out photos from the cold cases. Same weapon, same targeting pattern. Reeves wasn't just following in his father's footsteps, he was recreating his childhood trauma on the streets. The investigation expanded. Other officers' records were pulled. The lieutenant who buried the complaints faced his own inquiry. The thin blue line began to show cracks. Emma's TikTok series, #CopsDaughter, sparked a movement. Other police children came forward with their stories. The hashtag trended alongside clips of Bernard's academic lectures on constitutional law and police reform from years earlier. "Your father's work," Agent Thompson told the president, "might finally get the attention it deserves." Bernard, watching the national conversation unfold from his hospital bed, began writing. His fingers, still bruised, moved slowly across his laptop's keyboard, an open letter to Emma Reeves and every child of violence. In her kitchen, Sarah Reeves found her husband's police academy graduation photo. Young James, smiling, full of promise. She took it out of the frame and found what she'd forgotten: a child's drawing on the back. James, at 8 years old, had drawn himself as a police officer with the words, "When I grow up, I want to protect people from dads like mine." Emma's latest video finished uploading. "Dad, if you're watching this, I'm not afraid anymore. And I don't want you to be afraid either. It's time to break the cycle." In his cell, James Reeves made a decision. He asked for paper and began to write, his handwriting shaky. "Dear Internal Affairs, I'm ready to tell you everything. Not just about me. About all of us." The president's phone buzzed with a text from Bernard. "Son, I want to meet him. Not the officer who hit me. The scared boy who became that officer. It's time we all looked in the mirror." The White House Rose Garden had never hosted an event quite like this. News cameras focused on the peculiar sight. Bernard Mitchell and Emma Reeves standing together at the podium, her TikTok recording light blinking steadily beside the official presidential seal. "Change," Bernard began, his face still bearing faint bruises, "doesn't begin with laws or policies. It begins when we face our reflections and acknowledge what we see." He touched his healing jaw gently. "Even when what we see hurts." In the audience, James Reeves sat in an orange jumpsuit, flanked by guards. His sentence had been handed down the day before, 8 years for the assault on Bernard, with additional charges pending for the cold cases. But today wasn't about punishment, it was about transformation. Emma stepped forward, her voice steady. "My father's steel knuckles were melted down yesterday. The metal that caused so much pain will be reforged into badges for a new police training program." She met her father's eyes. "Each badge will be engraved with the words, 'Protect others, heal yourself.'" Sarah Reeves watched from the front row, remembering the morning everything changed. The coffee stains had been painted over, but their marriage counselor had suggested keeping one small mark visible, a reminder of rock bottom, and the choice to climb up from it. The president stood off to the side, for once not the central figure. His father had insisted on this arrangement. Some wounds, Bernard had said, need to be healed by those who understand them best. The Bernard Mitchell Initiative, Emma announced, her TikTok followers watching live, will require all police officers to undergo trauma screening and continuous mental health support. No more buried pain. No more passed-down violence. In his seat, James Reeves listened as his daughter detailed the program that would bear his victim's name. His hands, now free of both steel knuckles and handcuffs, gripped his knees. The guard beside him passed him a tissue, their eyes meeting in silent understanding. Bernard returned to the podium. Officer Reeves and I met privately yesterday. We spoke not as victim and attacker, but as two men shaped by generations of unspoken pain. He showed me a photo of himself at 8 years old, dreaming of becoming an officer to protect others from what he endured. Somewhere, that dream got lost in trauma's shadow. The Attorney General stood as Bernard gestured to her. Thanks to Officer Reeves' full cooperation, 37 cases of buried police misconduct have been reopened. The wall of silence is cracking. Healing is contagious. Emma's voice cracked slightly. Dad, I know you're listening. Your grandpa's steel knuckles don't define our family anymore. Your courage to finally face the truth does. In the maximum security prison, where James Reeves' father spent his final years, a TV showed the ceremony. Old inmates watched silently as generational violence was transformed into hope. The president finally stepped forward. Today, we sign into law the most comprehensive police reform bill in our nation's history. But laws alone cannot heal hearts. That journey belongs to all of us. Bernard and Emma together gripped the handles of a small furnace. Inside, the final set of steel knuckles, found in James' father's prison belongings, melted into liquid possibility. James Reeves stood, tears streaming freely. The guards moved to restrain him, but Bernard waved them off. Father and daughter embraced for the first time since that coffee-stained morning, as cameras flashed and history turned a page. The burden of change, Bernard concluded, his arm around Emma's shoulders, should never rest solely on the next generation's shoulders. But sometimes it takes a child to lead us home. In the years that followed, police academies would display two photos side by side, Bernard Mitchell falling and Emma Reeves rising to speak truth to power. Between them, a simple plaque read, "Every ending is a beginning. Choose which one you'll be."